Tonight, I have some really exciting stories to share with you all. Probably one of the most diverse videos I've posted to date. From a tale of Goatman's bridge, the problems with dating apps, black-eyed kids, cryptids, demented Black Friday items, stalkers, and a mysterious cyclist out for blood. Every story tonight will bring the chill factor, cold and ready for your enjoyment. I hope you guys like them. A huge thank you to the incredible authors who allowed this video to be possible. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. I also wanted to say thank you all for the support on my recent live streams. I've been trying to get back into it lately, and every stream I've done so far has been a blast. So hey, if you enjoy that type of thing, make sure you have notifications on so you don't miss the next time I go live. Likes and comments are always appreciated if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. So for starters, I'm a huge fanatic of the paranormal/supernatural, as are my two younger sisters. We've never experienced anything super crazy, save for bumps in the night that we could easily debunk. Though I did encounter a shadow person several years ago, but this takes the cake. Even though I'm still not sure what it was we saw that night. For a little background, my family is a bit scattered. I live in Nebraska, while my two half-sisters live with my stepmom. Though I'm not sure what she'd be considered now, since her and my father are divorced, in Washington. And my dad lives with his new wife and my stepsister in a small town outside of Dallas, Texas. As you can imagine, it's a little hard trying to see everyone within a year. However, my sisters were visiting my dad over the summer, and I was able to get a little over a week off from work to see my family and spend some time with them. Since we'd all been down there, and since my sisters and I love creepy stuff, we decided to check out one of the biggest urban legends in Texas, Goatman Bridge. Now, there was absolutely no convincing my dad to let us go. He's super religious and very against haunted things, demons, attempting to contact ghosts, etc. He also was not a fan of how far away the alleged haunted bridge was, and didn't want us to go. I was disappointed, but didn't want to upset him, so I agreed to his terms. My sisters, however, had other plans, and like any other responsible 21-year-old, I let my 16 and 13-year-old sisters talk me into lying. I told my dad we were going out to eat after a fun-filled day of Six Flags, then drove us out to the little town of Denton, and to the old Alton Bridge where the supposed Goatman was. However, getting to the bridge was a little tricky. My GPS wasn't updating fast enough, so we wound up missing the turn, and had to do a massive loop on a dark country road to get back to the pathway for Old Alton Bridge, since the bridge is closed to vehicles. There was a soccer game going on in the field about a mile or two away from the turnoff to the gravel road of the bridge, but other than that, everything else was shut down for the night, and not many cars traveled the roads. When we finally managed to make the turn down the gravel hill and park, we ran into another group who told us there was no Goatman that night, to be safe, and to check out the creepy path off to the left. My sisters and I thanked the group and ducked under the metal bar closing off the land as the group left in their pickup truck. It was about 10:30 or so at night, and the forest was eerily still. Though we could hear the cicadas chirping, we all felt some sort of heavy weight pressing down on us, and it felt like we were being watched as we passed further into the woods. The flashlight of our phones were dulled against the thick shrubbery of the forest, and I almost expected to see something lurking in the shadows, though I kept assuring myself I was psyching myself out. We made it to the start of the bridge, and I gotta admit, I was pretty spooked. It was so dark you couldn't see the edge of the bridge, even with lights, and the feeling of being watched felt stronger. I brushed it off once again as my own paranoia, and me and my sisters continued to walk down the bridge, commenting about how cool and creepy it was, and reading the writing and satanic symbols scrawled onto the bridge. As we were walking, I flashed my light to the edge of the bridge. I could have sworn I saw a black mass standing at the end, but when I looked again, it was gone. My sisters and I also heard something moving around in the woods back from where we came, and heard splashing from the creek down below. But neither me nor my sisters saw anyone else. I thought maybe it was the group from before and called out to them, but there was no answer, and honestly, it didn't feel human, as crazy as that sounds. After a few more minutes of exploring, I decided it was time to leave the bridge and maybe check out the pathway the group was telling us about. My sisters agreed, and we were walking off the bridge and towards the path. Both my flashlight and my sister's flashlight went out. I got a little freaked out, but told myself it was fine, and turned my phone's flashlight back on while my sister struggled to turn hers on. And as we neared the path, that's when I saw it. Standing by the entrance of the forest, about 20 or so feet away, was a tall, thin, black shadowy mass. It looked slightly transparent, but was also somehow solid, and it looked like it was almost flickering or wavering. I'm not sure how else to explain it. It had long, sharp claws, and it appeared to be holding something in its right hand, but I couldn't see what it was. It was somewhat tucked behind him. Its eyes weren't visible, but I still felt it watching us, and the presence felt evil. Now, I didn't move at first. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, so I took a step closer to see if I could find a logical explanation for its shape. But when I took a step forward, the thing moved, and the slight unease I felt went into complete panic mode. I don't think I've ever screamed so loud before in my life. I told my sisters to run, and at first they thought I was joking, but when I kept screaming and told them to go, they realized I was being serious, and we all sprinted for the car parked on the gravel road, which was maybe a few hundred or so yards away. I took one last look behind my shoulder and saw the shadow running towards us, but it vanished before I had a chance to blink. I turned my attention back to what was in front of me and slid under the metal bar, unlocked the car, and tore out of the makeshift parking lot without putting on my seatbelt. I was shaking and crying and could hardly breathe. My body felt like it was on fire. As we approached the main road, we could make out two men dressed in white running from the soccer field to the forest where we came from, and I wondered if it was because they heard the screams, but I didn't want to stick around and find out. I just wanted to get the hell away from there. The hour ride home was silent, and my mind was racing to figure out what that thing was. I kept trying to find a logical explanation for what I saw, but I was grasping at straws, and I knew it. Part of me wanted to go back and figure out exactly what it was, and the other part wanted to stay as far away as possible and just be content with not knowing. Either way, I was creeped out, and genuinely feared for my safety and my sister's safety. Eventually I asked my sisters if they saw anything, hoping that maybe it really was just my mind playing tricks on me. But their answers did little to settle my nerves. Though they didn't see the same thing I saw, they both had a strange experience on the bridge itself. My 16-year-old sister, Cadence, explained that when she was by herself over where I thought I saw the shadow, she thought she saw what looked like an eye watching her from underneath the bridge. She could see the light of her phone reflecting off its eye, and when she moved in, it followed her movements. My other sister, Kayla, claimed she felt physically sick the entire time, and when she stood near the railing of the bridge, overlooking the creek, she heard a deep, guttural voice telling her to jump off, as well as laughter, but she wasn't sure where it was coming from. We did some light research about the bridge after we arrived home, and other than the Goatman sightings and story, it's said that there have been murders and disappearances in the woods surrounding the bridge, and satanic rituals are done on the bridge, which may have potentially brought other evil beings to that location. And after what happened that night, I'm convinced there is something evil lurking on the grounds of Old Alton Bridge. Whether it was the Goatman himself, or something else, I'm not entirely sure. But what I am sure of is that the urban legend may not be so fictional after all. The summer of 2016 was my year to get back on track. I was a prison guard and recently separated from my marriage. I decided to try internet dating, Tinder to be specific. Overwhelming number of women on this app, I began to swipe. Left, left, left. After about 20 minutes or so of reading bios of this buffet of matches, I saw the perfect one. Savannah, age 24, average looking woman with intense blue eyes, hair pulled up and, lucky me, only 10 miles away. After reading her short bio, she sounded like an amazing woman, nerdy type, loves anime, video games, has a stable job as a nurse. Nurses are supposed to be attractive and caring, right? A hell of an upgrade from my last relationship, and if she worked at the hospital, we sent inmates to. I would get to see her during shift, as we pulled 24-hour guard duty, while prisoners were admitted to the hospital. So I decided to actually look at her photos. 5 photos, kinda plain I guess, typical mirror selfies. One where she's in a park, another where she's playing a tabletop game, D&D I think, but the last photo was kinda weird. It looks like she has been crying for hours, eyes red and puffy, makeup running down her face, and her face was scowled, glaring with her blue eyes licking the dull end of a knife, those eyes just piercing right into my soul, it seemed. I kinda shuddered at seeing it, but after reading the bio again and seeing the other photos, I decided to swipe right. Almost immediately I receive a message from her. "Hey cutie." Not to seem desperate, I waited a few minutes to come up with the best one-liner I could think of. But before I could find anything ice-breaking, she sent a second message. "I'm kinda hungry after my shift. Would you like to get a bite to eat?" Well, this saved me from embarrassment, I suppose. I messaged back. "Hello there. Sure. Any place in particular?" She didn't respond. Figures. Maybe she found someone more interesting. Or was one of those defective bots always trying to get you to click a virus-filled link. So I went on about my day, running errands and playing video games. My phone dinged around 2 p.m. New message from Savannah. I could hardly contain my excitement. "General Kenobi, I would like to go somewhere nice, maybe seafood. Also, sorry I passed out, I was so tired from my shift." This woman surprised me with the cheesy reference, and clearly loves food. Wonder what other surprises were in store. We lived in a military/tourist beach town in northwest Florida, so there were no shortage of seafood places. I chose one I had never been to before, a restaurant on the beach. 1,700 flounders, sound good? If not, we can go somewhere else, which is a perfect way to end a date by walking on the beach afterwards. Especially on a full moon, romance would just be spilling over. She messaged back around an hour later. "Sure thing, cutie, I'll see you then," with a kissy face emoji. So wanting to look nice, I went out and bought new clothes for the night. I didn't want to make any mistakes. I wanted tonight to be as perfect as I could make it. 5 p.m. came and she wasn't anywhere to be seen. She hadn't responded to my other 2 messages from earlier either. Around 5:36, she finally messaged me, saying she had just gotten up and that road traffic is awful. Which on this part of town it's always crowded due to tourists and construction. So I finally saw her pull up and we went about the day. We talked for hours, sometimes interrupting each other on accident before the excitement of seemingly being with someone who was too much in common with one another. I told her about my previous relationship and why I'm back in Florida, and she told me hers. Nothing too out of the normal for people with breakups. After we ate, we walked on the beach, talking some more, taking selfies, holding hands, and kissing occasionally. Her piercing blue eyes seemed to give an unnatural glow in the moonlight. She occasionally just glares at me and kinda giggles without smiling. Kinda creepy, but I was just hypnotized by her. She was absolutely amazing. It was around midnight and we had walked so far up the beach, no one was around. She started to take off her clothes, down to just her underwear. I nervously asked her what she was doing, and she said she was going for a swim. She glared at me and made that unsmiling giggle. I thought her underwear was basically a bikini and mine? Well, stop overthinking and just get in, idiot. I didn't have time to get fully undressed as she pushed me in. We splashed around a bit, made out for a while, until things got to a point if we were caught, we would go to jail for the night. We stayed until the sun broke the sky. At this point we were in a lifeguard shack, looking at the waves, just enjoying each other's company in silence as we snuggled up next to each other. It had been the perfect night. Often glancing at her, wondering if it was real. We agreed it is late, and need sleep, so she and I parted ways after exchanging numbers. I lost my keys, thinking it was because she pushed me in the water before. I retrieved my spare keys from the magnetic key holder under my car, and left. On the way home, I sent the typical text on the way. "Hope you have a safe drive home. I really enjoyed tonight. Thank you." I went home and slept. Later that evening, when I woke up to the sound of a loud noise outside my window. It was dark, but I saw something run from my yard. I quickly got up and went to the door to cut them off, and when I got there, all I could see was 2 random stray dogs running about the street. I decided to go back to bed and looked at my phone. No new messages from Savannah. It's not surprising since she could still be asleep. I got back up, ate, and went back to bed shortly before midnight to enjoy my last day off work. The next day, still nothing. I decided to send another text asking how her day was. By the following day, I decided to give up. I didn't want to seem desperate, so I decided to wait until she messaged me. After a week and a half, I just summed it up to maybe she wasn't looking for anything serious, which is fine. It happens to guys all the time. No sense in not assuming women do it too. But to my surprise, later that day I got a phone call from Savannah. She explained how she lost her phone when she was going home that night, and how it took this long to get a replacement. She hoped I had not given up on her. She giggled and said that she wanted to see me again. Thinking that maybe it wasn't that far-fetched, I agreed, and suggested another restaurant in the same area. It was a restaurant named after a dead author, with tons of memorabilia, and right on the beach. Formal beachwear was the dress code, which consists of preferably khaki shorts, button-up Hawaiian shirts, and flip-flops. It was low ambient lighting too, which is perfect for a second date. She agreed, and we set the time for 5 p.m. She was late again, but she had been texting me throughout the day. She was overly giving me updates, but every 5 minutes I would get a text, saying what she saw, passed by, even what song was on the radio, asking me if I would like her to call to hear her sing. I simply said just be careful and focus on driving. It was around 7:40 or so when she pulled up, nearly 3 hours late. At this point I really just wanted to go home, but when I saw those eyes, I just melted a bit. She got out, looked me up and down, and gave me a hug, giggled that unsmiling giggle in my ear. She finally let go, and just started telling me the hellish days she had had. As she was walking to the other side of her car, I noticed a car seat. I didn't recall anything about her having a kid though. She didn't even have your typical mom body, I guess you would call it. Or perhaps I didn't pay that much of attention. She pulled the kid out and introduced her. This is Molly, she's my baby. But something was a little off. Even though she said she was still asleep, the kid was a bit too limp for a kid. And how she was going to some prestigious private school. And how much of a prodigy her baby was for 8 years old. I mean, parents are supposed to dote on their kids, right? Those piercing blue eyes. That giggle. We got into the restaurant and noticing the low lights and memorabilia, we just kind of took a moment to take it all in before we sat down. The hostess asked us to follow her and sat us down. Savannah asked her for a high chair, and the hostess kind of just looked at me, with kind of a stoic look before she slowly smiled and left. A bit strange, but I wasn't too interested in figuring out why. Savannah asked me if she could order her kid something. Since I was paying after all, I said sure. I wasn't going to let a kid watch anyone eat, and it would just be rude to not include the kid on the date, especially a chance for me to earn brownie points from a mom. I asked about Molly, and why she didn't mention her before. Savannah just kinda glared at me like I offended her or something, but when she giggled and said she was uncomfortable telling or introducing her kid on the first date, and that the only reason she brought her tonight was to introduce me to her, and that she didn't have a sitter that night. Fair enough. As she talked more about her kid, I noticed over the corner of my eye that her kid was staring at me. I glanced over at Molly to see why she was staring at me, but something wasn't right. Savannah waved at me and said, "It's rude to not look at someone when they are talking to you." I said, "Yeah, I'm sorry." About then the waitress came around and Savannah ordered her and Molly some food. I noticed that the waitress was kind of nervously looking at me and Savannah. Right at that point, Savannah looked at me with that death glare and asked me why I was staring at that waitress. I said I wasn't. I was just thinking. Holy crap, I thought to myself. This is pretty crazy. She blankly looked at me with an unsmiling giggle and said she had to go to the bathroom. She motioned over to Molly and asked if I could watch her until she returned. My blood ran cold. I can't believe I didn't notice before. Molly was a doll, and not just any doll. The one you spend tens of hundreds of dollars on. A coping doll, I think. I said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." She kissed Molly and quietly said something to the doll. I heard it though. She whispered, "Be good for Daddy, I'll be right back." She was gone for what seemed like 20 minutes. I hadn't touched my food at all, so I could just stare at the doll. My dream girl was a lunatic. Those subtle glares I found exotic and sexy seemed terrifying. The waitress came by and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. Then she replied, "Well, why are you still here?" I said, "What do you mean?" The waitress looked around and leaned in. "You know that's a doll, right? You need to leave before she gets back." I agreed and thanked her. She said she would think of something to tell her as I paid for dinner. As I left, I couldn't help but rerun everything in my mind. The good and the bad. It just felt like a dream. As I pulled into my driveway, I remember the night I first went on a date with Savannah. The noise by my window. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check. I realized I hadn't really checked, and just assumed it was the dog. On the ground by the window, I found a cell phone. It had a life-proof case on, but it was dead. I went inside to put it on charge, and that's when I got a call. It was Savannah. It had been about an hour since I left the restaurant. She started screaming and cussing me, saying how could I leave our child in there by herself, that I was a bad father, and started telling me all the terrible things she was going to do to me. All I could say was, "Did you just come back from the bathroom?" She said yes, you were gone, and that's when she hung up. Freaked out even more, I noticed the phone is at 5% now. I turned it on and the wallpaper just confirmed what I already knew. It was a picture of me and Savannah from our first date night. She didn't have a lock on her phone, so I went through it. Well over 20 photos of me sleeping, and a video of me driving my car as she followed me home. I called the police and filed a report. I wish I could say that was the last of it, but it wasn't. 7 months later, remember how I said I often pull hospital duty? Turns out it is the hospital she works at. And sure enough, she was the nurse on duty for that particular prisoner. The death glares and cold tones she spoke to everyone in the room. I immediately requested a new nurse, since by our policy, and according to state law, I was within policy to do so. The head nurse came back with her and asked what the issue was. I explained to her that we cannot be in the same area, as we do not get along. Giggling without a smile, she said she didn't know who I was, and doesn't know what I'm talking about. The head nurse separated us anyway, just to keep the peace. She texted my phone later on that night, a photo that she was crying, and the text under it said, "Answer me, or I'll kill you." I blocked the message, and called my captain and explained everything. They replaced me with another guard, and I finished my shift and went home. Then later that week, I had one more photo from her. She texted me from a different number. She was naked and it was a downward angle. I could see the bathroom. It was my bathroom. My heart raced as I cleared the house, making sure everything was locked. Then my heart sank as I considered maybe my missing keys from the date weren't actually lost, but she had taken them. I took emergency leave from work and started packing. I moved in with a friend and long since switched jobs. Even though I live in another city, when I am out in public, sometimes I swear I can hear that giggle. I'm 26 with a husband and 2 kids. My husband's name is Jack, and I have a 6-year-old son, James, and a 3-year-old daughter named Danielle. We live a normal life with not many strange things to talk about. My son gets straight A's, and recently was named Student of the Year for his first grade class. You could say our family is about as ordinary as it gets. Living in Denver, Colorado is nice, but sometimes I wish we could afford to move, to give our kids a better future. About 2 weeks ago, I was tucking in the little ones. I had just finished reading their bedtime stories to them when I heard a knock at the door. It was only 7:45. I wasn't expecting Jack to get home until closer to 9. James peered out of his bedroom window, since it was just above the front door. He looked down and then spun around. "Mommy, there's 2 kids outside. I don't think we know them." He shot me an innocent but confused look. He looked back out the window, then said, "Never mind, Mommy, they left." I thought maybe they were just some kids pulling a prank. I finished putting James and Danielle into their beds and turned all the upstairs lights off. I headed downstairs to follow my nightly routine. I'd usually clean the dishes from dinner and watch TV until Jack got home. I had been on the couch for about an hour watching TV. The dishes were cleaned and the kids were silent. Jack would be home any minute. I reached for my phone and it read 9:03. As my eyes scanned my phone screen, I heard a knock at the door. Just 4 little quiet knocks. I got up and looked out of the peephole and didn't see a thing. My phone started ringing, so I ran to grab it. It was from Jack. "Hey babe, is everything okay? When will you be home?" I asked. "I'm already home, but I was a little worried. Are the kids in bed?" I paused. "Yeah, they've been sound asleep for a while." There was a long pause between us. "Then who are the 2 kids at the front door?" 3 more little knocks came from the door. I had almost forgotten that anyone knocked. "Ma'am, we know you're in there. We need help. We lost our mom." Jack could hear them through the phone. "Don't open the door. Something is wrong." "Jack, I think they need help." "No. They've been there ever since I pulled into the driveway 5 minutes ago. They haven't once looked away from the door. If they needed help, they would have come to me for help at the car. I walked slowly back to the door to try and see them. I heard a quick few knocks, much harder than the last few. Miss, we can hear you. Me and my sister are very cold. Won't you help us and let us in? It was late spring. There's no way someone could gain pity for being cold. I calmly reached my face to the peephole. Do you see them now? They're right there. Jack yelled through the phone. No, I can't see them. 1 second. I was short, so I grabbed a kitchen chair and tried again. Let us in. The child who had been doing the talking started yelling. I looked through the peephole again. I heard Jack on the phone, but I had to set it down, so I couldn't understand his quiet mutters. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 2 faces were right there. One older boy and a little girl. Both looked to be the ages of my own kids. Both of their eyes pierced through me. They were solid black. I gasped and stepped off the chair. I grabbed my phone and told Jack about their eyes. He paused, then decided he couldn't help us until they left. He explained that his grandmother always warned him of the black-eyed children. You never let them in. Try to ignore them, and never help them with whatever they ask for help with. They'll eventually go away, but if you invite them in... He shuddered. We don't know what happens if they come in. I wanted to run upstairs to be with my kids, but I knew I should also guard the door. I walked into the kitchen while Jack told me more about them. I began closing curtains and checking locks on the windows and back door. Wait, they're moving. I think they're leaving. As soon as I can't see them anymore, I want you to open the door and I'm gonna run in. Jack said with excitement. I said okay, as I continued closing curtains and turning locks. They're near the back of the house now. I'm gonna bolt. Are you ready? I paused and asked Jack to repeat himself. As he ended that sentence a second time, I turned to the window above the kitchen sink. I was in the back side of the house. 2 sets of eyes glared back at me. I dropped the phone and stood there. It was probably about 5 seconds later that I heard my husband frantically knocking at the front door. The children were still as glass. They didn't budge. I spun around and ran as fast as I could to the door to get Jack in. He rushed in, slammed the door, then locked every lock and shoved the kitchen chair underneath of the knob. I went back to the kitchen and they were gone. We both ran to every window on both floors and shut the curtains. I went to my son's room and locked down outside of his window. I saw both kids staring back at me. We will get in, I heard in my ear. I spun around, saw no one. Then the kids were also gone. I haven't seen them since. I'm glad my husband knew not to open the door. If I had, I'm not sure you'd ever hear about it. I'm writing this as I go to sleep. I'm not sure what tomorrow will bring, but hopefully I wake up. I woke up one day thinking this will just be a typical day. I got dressed, ate breakfast, and started on homework. My dad sent me a text. Come help me outside. I went outside and talked to him. He said something killed all of our chickens. It looked like it was big, and pointed to the ground. I saw a massive footprint in the mud bigger than mine. That was only the beginning. Over the next month, a lot of reports of dead animals have gone around in our neighborhood. Dogs went missing, someone's snake was ripped to shreds, and eventually, a child was never seen again. One guy said that he caught a glimpse of the creature that did it. He said it was tall and white, and had long arms. Nobody believed him as it was October, and they thought he was trying to scare them. They should have listened. My friend Gabrielle came by one day and wanted me to come outside with him to hang out. I asked my dad and he said sure. Me and Gabrielle went out, talking about the normal things teenage boys talk about, and started to walk into the woods. By now, it had turned December, and snow was raining down. There was 9 to 14 inches of snow, and it was currently snowing too. We went down a big fallen tree we usually hang out at. I looked at the massive thing sitting in the snow. It had to be 120 feet tall, at least. Good thing it had fallen now, since we went into all of the branches to get away from the snow. We talked for about an hour. By now it was really coming down hard. I could hardly hear or see a thing outside of the tree. I checked my phone and sent my dad a text. We're okay. Gabrielle said that he heard something outside. Bullshit. We can't hear a thing out here. I told him. I'm gonna check it out, he said. Gabrielle, wait. But by then, he couldn't hear me. He He climbed up towards the branch and climbed out of the tree. He disappeared into the snowstorm. I didn't hear anything outside. The snow was too loud. I said, "Gabrielle?" Nothing. I waited for a good 15 or so minutes before calling out again. Still nothing. I started to remember the stories about animals going missing, and that boy. I waited for hours. It was dark out when I decided to take a peek. The snow was still coming down, and I had gotten frostbite. I climbed outwards to the branch and peeked my head out. I saw something jump across one tree to another, and something else made a sound behind me. I didn't have to think twice. I went right back into the tree and prayed to God that whatever it was out there hadn't seen me. Slither. I shivered head to toe. Slither. I started breathing rapidly. I didn't know what made that sound, but it was right above me. A hole appeared in the tree branches, as if something was trying to get in. Whatever it was had been too big because it tried and tried, but couldn't get in. I had an idea to try and see what it was. I went to the place I had stuck my head out before and put my phone through the crack and started recording video. I circled the phone around in every direction slowly, until it reached where I had started. I yanked the phone back through the crack and went down. I played the video. The camera started turning. I didn't see anything at first, but saw some sort of white, scaly tail appear into the view of the camera. What followed was horrifying. The creature looked like it was 8 or 9 feet tall. It was completely white and covered in scales. The tail was around 6 feet long, and it had arms even longer. The arms reached all the way down to its feet. It slowly turned and looked straight at the camera. Right before, it started to reach over and I yanked the phone down. I started to think it was a dream and that I would fall asleep and wake up in my bed the next day, away as if nothing had even happened. I laid my head down and started crying. These might be my final words, so if you never hear from me again, it got in. On Black Friday, I picked up some cheap wireless headphones. They look like AirPods, but were only $15. Last night I was listening to some music. In between songs, I swear I heard a voice. I took the headphones out and listened to see if maybe one of my family members had come to visit. Nope, no one was there. I shrugged it off and started listening to my music again. This time between songs, I heard someone again, but this time I got a very uneasy feeling, as it vaguely sounded like, "Please help." I paused my music, but this time I didn't take out my headphones. "Hello?" I called out. A couple of seconds passed, and that's when I heard it, loud and clear through the headphones. "Help, I'm in here." I yanked the earbuds out and called my husband. He said it was probably just a prank or a glitch with Spotify. Nevertheless, I kept my headphones out of my ears and started watching TV. It was about 8 p.m., which means my husband should be home soon. I got a text message, "On my way," from my husband. Oh, good, I thought, because I still hadn't shaken that uneasy feeling and didn't want to be alone. My ears started ringing, like when someone plays those loud dog whistles, and I realized it was coming from the headphones. Just as I picked them up, I heard a knock at the door. Weird, I thought, as I don't remember locking the door, and my husband has his own key, but I went down to let him in. I peeked out the window beside the door and no one was there. Loving scary movies, I most certainly didn't open the door, as I'm sure we all know what happens when you open the door to a mysterious noise. Hint, you die. I checked my phone to see where my husband was, but he strangely was still at work. That's odd. Maybe he forgot to do something. I texted him back. "Where are you? I thought you said you were leaving." Several minutes passed. Another knock at the door, this time much louder. I got a response. "I'm here." Another knock. Another message. "Let me in." I peeked out the window and still didn't see anyone. I didn't even see my husband's car. I screamed, "Stop this! I don't see you, and I'm getting really freaked out." Another knock. "That's it. I'm calling you." My phone began to ring. "You have reached the voicemail box of..." Why isn't he answering? Then suddenly my phone starts ringing. It was my husband. I answered the phone. "Where are you? You're freaking me out. Stop doing this." "Why?" And then I heard it. The loud screeching of a dog whistle. This time my dog heard it too because she started to whine. And then, clear as day, I heard it as if it was right behind me. "Hello," and then a chuckle. I dropped my phone, grabbed my dog, and ran out to my car and left quickly. In my rearview mirror, I could see what looked like a human form standing on my porch, but it was pitch black, almost like a shadow. It was completely silent when my radio turned on, as if it was shuffling through channels. It was nonsense at first, and then I realized there was a message repeating, "I'm coming too." That's when I saw it, my phone sitting next to me, as well as my headphones. I slammed on my brakes and tossed the headphones out of the window. As I did so, my dog started barking at them as we pulled away. I pulled up to my sister's house and ran inside and told her everything that happened. She laughed at first, but when I told her about the figure on the porch, she got quiet. She asked if the person looked like a void of blackness, and I quickly said, "Yeah, almost like a shadow, but darker." She hugged me tightly and then pulled up an article. The headline read, "Man dies in Virginia after electrical shortage in earbuds. Dated 6 years ago." The photo was my husband. I don't understand. I don't remember the last 6 years of living without my husband. How could that be? My sister said I had told her about the shadow figure once before. It was on the night of my husband's death. She said I told her I saw him in the road going to the hospital and wrecked my car. I was in a coma for a few months and still have some lapses in my memory from time to time. I'm still in shock, and I don't know how else to deal with all of this. I just need to write this down. It just doesn't seem real. Is the shadow my husband? Is it something dark? I always thought loved ones would give a calming feeling if they were present after death, and the energy didn't feel like my husband. I just hope I don't ever see it again. But one thing I am certain of is that I will never use those cheap headphones again. The truth is, I'm not a good person to tell a story like this. A scary story. Because I've seen far too many horror movies. Every fiber of my being wants me to underplay it, to pretend it isn't really anything important at all. But there was something scary about the last few days, and whether I want to believe it or not, it does represent a change in my worldview. Watching horror movies has never felt connected to my actual life. Most of the time, they're not scary anyway. They don't really represent reality in any tangible way. They're based on jump scares and built-up scores, things that go bump in the night, and unsuspecting strangers learning to fight them. Even despite their worst fears and usual injuries that should kill them on the spot. So when the car started to follow me, I didn't take much notice. It was a driver who was angry, I decided. Maybe an ex who hadn't gotten over themselves. I doubted my wife would hire a private investigator on me, but I briefly joked to myself that was what the car was. Things started out slowly. First, I kept noticing the car. I feel like I should defend myself by saying I would have gotten scared sooner if the car had kept following me, but it would disappear for a while, for days at a time. Then it would appear again, parked around the corner or following 2 cars behind. Same license plate, same windows tinted so dark it could not have been legal. I remember distinctly joking to Layla that the paparazzi were after us. She was more off-put by it than I was, but honestly, even I was scared. I would not have wanted to show it. If someone was following me, I didn't want them to see any fear. Maybe that's my ego talking. My wife says I would fight my own shadow if I could. The truth is, growing up, I wasn't really a functioning member of society. I got bullied quite a lot, never really understood people. Things changed as I got older. I learned more social skills, learned to stop being so awkward around people. Layla is insanely out of my league actually, but I guess growing up feeling like an outsider gave me an edge in humor, because nowadays I work on the set of a TV show. Not a writer, but a script supervisor. I like a good story, and I like getting into other people's heads. TV was an easy choice. I get to be someone else, even if it doesn't last long. The relevance of this is that something weird happened to me at work a few days ago. Besides the car, that was the first red flag that something was wrong. Ricardo was one of the younger writers. He was barely 30 and had been working on the show for years. He had a hell of an imagination, so at first, I really thought he was joking when he told me that he got the revised pages I had suggested. Thing was, I hadn't actually spoken to Ricardo in a few days. We'd had a short break between 2 episodes to process, and as far as I knew, the script for the next few had been finalized anyway. What do you mean? You told me to yesterday. He had told me. Looking more annoyed than confused at this point, I guess he thought I was playing a joke, which wasn't entirely out of character, all things considered. I didn't see you yesterday, Rick. I was home with Layla and the kids. I remember how intently he glared at me. Weird, considering we'd been friends ever since he started as a PA. He detailed to me that I had bumped into him while buying groceries, how I had very aggressively suggested changes to the new script. Even insinuated he would lose his job if he didn't institute them, something which, as it happened, I don't think I even have the power to do. What's more, I hadn't gone to the shops. Layla and I didn't even share a local shop with Ricardo, so I don't know why I'd have been there. I commute to set most days I'm working on site. I've always preferred keeping away from crowds of people. It was that night that Layla told me she heard footsteps in the front yard. We live in a relatively secluded property. No one should be walking around anywhere near our house, so it was a pretty justified fear. I puffed up my chest and told her I'd do it, and even though I pride myself on not being scared of horror movie moments, I did feel a chill go down my spine when I saw the figure walking away from my house, off towards the barely visible tree line. Hey! Another stupid horror movie moment. Everyone knew you didn't scream at the creepy stranger, didn't draw attention to yourself, but I did. The figure stopped, but if it turned or looked at me, I couldn't tell. It was dark out, and the figure was already a ways away. I could have chased, but it felt like making things less safe for Layla and for the kids. After that, the car was back. This time, it didn't seem to waver. Whoever was following me had decided, seemingly pretty quickly, that if I knew they were following, they weren't going to hide anymore. I'd like to say I wasn't scared at this point, but I was beginning to feel the anxiety of being followed day in and day out. Since the car never followed Layla or my boys, only me, I figured whoever it was only following me. So be it. The next day, yesterday, I told Layla I wanted her to go stay with her mother for a few days. If this was leading to a confrontation, and if I had anything to say about it, it would. I didn't want them to be there to see it. It was too dangerous. Last night, I armed myself with a loaded shotgun, locked up the house, and waited. I had seen the car follow me home from work, so I knew my mysterious stranger was coming. This time, I would follow. This time, I would find out, or so I told myself. It was 10 p.m. when I saw the figure in the tree line. Dark enough that I couldn't see a face, but not dark enough that I could convince myself I was wrong that someone was there. I unlocked my back door and stood in my doorway, like a total fool who was about to get my ass kicked by a monster in a mask. If I were braver in that moment, I'd have fired. I didn't. I just stared. He just stared. And then, he was running, full force towards me. I held the gun up, ready and waiting to intimidate, hopefully scare off whoever was coming for me. The closer he got, the more I saw. He was tall, relatively thin. He was fast. That much was immediately apparent. It wasn't until he was several feet from me I could make out any features in the inky skied light. My features, my face, my body. So much for no horror movie moments, right? I turned and ran up towards my bedroom, suddenly filled with renewed purpose. I would have a better vantage point against the stranger version of myself from there. I could hide behind a door or something, I told myself, making an excuse for why I hadn't just shot in the first place. He was thundering into the house quicker than I had expected, all energy and limbs faster, I thought, than I had ever run. Then there was silence. I should have just waited there. But seconds dragged into minutes, and I realized that just waiting there wasn't going to work. Stranger me hadn't actually left the house, only stopped moving audibly. I listened for signs of life, but heard nothing. Clearly, one of us was going to have to break first. I was nervous energy, afraid and alone in the house, unsure when or where he would come from. That, I think, is what made me move. Damn our open plan house. You could get anywhere from anywhere else, with only very few closed doors. And so I crept. Gun in hand, I crept through the house, eyes peering out into the darkness of upstairs, still waiting to adjust to the dim lighting. If I were a smarter man, I'd have left the lights on all over the house, rather than deluding myself that I wasn't at risk here. A weight slammed into the back of me like a truck, knocked me off my feet and onto the ground. I was heavier than I had realized, apparently, because the force knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment, I was useless. Then I regained my footing. Having lost the shotgun when I fell, I reached around, feeling urgently for any sign of it around me, for any sign of any weapon. I wish I could detail better the fighting. I remember him kicking me in the ribs, and I remember me landing at least one good punch to his jaw. I couldn't find my gun, but I did manage to get on top, phone in hand. That was all I needed. And then I started hitting, again and again, phone in hand, for what felt like far too long, until the stranger me stopped moving beneath me, until I couldn't hear any breathing. I stumbled to my feet, feeling around the walls for the light switch, no doubt leaving blood all over the white walls in my wake. Layla would have to understand, stranger me was trying to kill me. When the lights flipped on, I scanned the scene. There was blood everywhere. The man at my feet didn't look so much like me anymore. He wore dark clothes with a dark hood. A perfect horror movie villain, it seemed. You see, I'm not a good person to tell you about horror movies, because they don't make any sense. If a monster comes at you in the dead of night, you're not going to survive with a stab wound in your stomach, and no weapon and no phone. If a stranger comes at you in the night, it's fast and brutal. No music, no jump scares, pure adrenaline, pure will to live. I keep trying to justify why I didn't shoot. Maybe it was Layla's influence. She's always been far more pacifistic than I was. She makes me more human, but the monster always wins in the end. I almost laughed when I caught sight of the knife he held. No doubt it was silver or iron or something similar, as if something like that could kill something like me. I firmly believe that the more order and structure we try to force upon the world, the more it resists and presents us with something unexplainable and unexpected, like a bubble in a flat sheet of plastic that won't burst or deflate. It just slithers to a different place if you try and push down on it. Sometimes, these things can be beneficial, even benevolent in nature, like living in a village where everyone is abnormally lucky, or a stretch of road that shaves off 30 minutes on your commute no matter where you are going. I would love to say that the tale I'm about to tell regards one of the wholesome anomalies, but it doesn't. It's something that has killed before, and almost killed me. I'm currently finishing up my second year in university. An average B to C student that's unsure of any of the material being taught has anything to do with the course I had picked. One thing you should know about the university is that the parking facilities are god-awful. Half of them are solely reserved for faculty. Another third is for on-campus businesses, and the only one for students that's anywhere close to any of the buildings can house 20 cars tops. I'm fortunate enough to be living close enough to the university for me to walk or cycle. There's a route behind the university rowing club called the rather unimaginative Riverwalk that I take most mornings. It's one of the few places that people can agree the local council did a good job on. You have around 6 benches facing the river, where most of the pensioners decide to feed the ducks and unruly swans. A long stretch of field about halfway between my house and the university, where some cattle do nothing but sleep or stare bewildered at you, and 2 bridges with shiny white railings and wooden slats that make a burrt noise when you cycle over them. In the winter, a van somehow manages to find its way to the bridges, and some tired-looking men in high-vis jackets sprinkle salt and sawdust on the slippery areas for traction. In the morning, the birds are chirping in the trees, young couples are walking their over-friendly retrievers, and the bushes rustle with local wildlife. You feel completely detached from the city, a mere mile or 2 away. And by the time I've reached the rowing club, I'm fresh and determined to slog through another boring lecture. Nobody goes down Riverwalk at night. Not the homeless, the drunk, or the local scumbags even glance in its direction. The only few that dare to go down it are the oblivious tourists who've heard nothing of the local legends, or the unfortunate students that spent too long in the computer labs finishing an assignment due the next day and have nowhere to go but home as quickly as they can. You can guess which category I fell into. If you're lucky, you'll pick a night where he doesn't show up, or by the time he does, you've gotten close to the end of the walk where he usually stops and turns back. People have died, yes, but more have survived. Otherwise, this would have garnered the attention of official, important people, and the walk would have been closed and left to the weeds. If no one had lived, then there would be no story to tell. Dead men tell no tales after all. There's a guy in my course, Richard Wesley, who's apparently gone through the ordeal before, around this time last year, when he was new to the city. He must have told the story to everyone in the class twice, more than 4 in my case. He calls the entity the boy in the blue coat, but most people call it him, the cyclist, simply because, well, he cycles. You never know when he's going to show up, only that it's never before 10 o'clock, and he always appears around half a mile before the rowing club, where the walk slowly fades into patchy grass and giant hogsweed. Richard has accommodation nearby the canal, which meets up with Riverwalk about a quarter of the way between the university and the end of the route where I live. Most people veer off the walk and go down the canal way, even if it takes them farther than their desired destination. The cyclist goes past the canal, over the little humpbacked bridge that spans its width. He never leaves Riverwalk, or even glances down the canal. If you're by the canal, you're safe. Richard was walking down that way. Back turned to the Riverwalk when he heard the jovial ting-ting of a bicycle bell, letting him know of its presence. He turned to let it pass and saw 2 figures going down the walk, one running at full sprint, with her hair whipping behind her in the wind, and the boy in the blue coat slowly catching up with her, sitting up from his saddle and leaning forward hungrily. The girl managed to get over the bridge and was obscured from view by a long fence surrounded by thistles, nettles, and wild undergrowth. The boy, not fazed at all by the strong wind, smoothly cycled over the bridge, gaining speed by the dip, and disappeared behind the fence. Then there was the scream, not one of shock, not even of fear, but the long, ragged scream of pain and torment. The girl's name was Sally Bay, and the local police found nothing of her after weeks of combing through every bush along the walk. So you could see why no one in their right mind would want to go down Riverwalk at night. I have no excuse for my naivety, but 1. The last reported sight of the cyclist was 8 months ago, the longest stretch of time he's been gone. Most people were beginning to think he was gone for good, and many had taken the walk since without any hassle. The only thing to be concerned about were the junkies who had acquired a new territory for themselves, since the cyclist had left. I was still reluctant to go. It was a little after 9:30, but I was hungry and tired, and too stressed out from the next day's deadline to be able to think rationally. I stuffed my laptop into its bag, put my coat on, and headed towards the rowing club. A few other people were ahead of me on the walk, but nobody was behind me. The river meanders slightly to the left, so if you look behind, you can follow the curve of the path between the trees. The lights had been recently replaced with those new energy-efficient bulbs that cast a pure white glow that makes everything seem like a noir thriller. I don't know why that was the course my mind decided to take as I walked. Clearly I was too tired to be able to keep it in check. You know how it is. You find yourself zoning out, eyes on your feet, and all thought is background noise that fizzes and buzzes randomly. I was in some sort of trance as I passed by the canal, and over the bridge when I heard the noise behind me in the distance. It was the sound of wheels over wooden slats. I turned around, still not fully alert, when I saw a flash of bright blue in between some of the trees, sporadically disappearing and reappearing behind the foliage, and fast approaching. When you see a character freeze in a horror movie, you want to either scream at them to move or watch them die slowly and painfully. You never understand why they don't do anything, and just stand there to await their fate. I used to be one of those people who would gladly watch them get eviscerated, but there I was, arms heavy by my side, heart pounding in my throat, and my chest held in a vice of cold, primal fear. The cyclist was still too far away to make out any discernible features, but I knew it was him. Even the trees seemed to lean away in fear. It might have been minutes, or even milliseconds. But the thought of seeing those stupid characters die in horror movies, the thought that now I was one of them, and maybe some angel was either screaming at me to move, or egging on my death forced one foot in front of the other, and I was suddenly running. I couldn't see anyone ahead of me. They must have turned down by the canal, which I was grateful for. I don't think I would have warned them, just ran ahead. How does that joke go? I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. I was about 20 minutes away from home if I was walking. I don't know how quickly I'd be there in a death run. All I could hear was the hitch of my breathing and the wet slap of my shoes on tarmac. All I could feel was the strap of my laptop bag press against me. I yanked it over my head. The initial plan was to hold it in my hand, but a tree branch decided to make itself known and snag itself on the strap. As I tried to wrestle back ownership, I saw the figure in blue glide over the bridge and, I don't know how, but I heard a tick and a beam of white light lanced out from the handlebars. He's got a flashlight now, I thought dumbly. Must have got it in the last few months. I decided to forfeit the laptop to the tree, and I stumbled back into a sprint. The cyclist was catching up. I could hear him switching gears. Up ahead, I saw that the path was widening out, and 3 steel billboards indicated the end of Riverwalk, and behind them was the first few houses of my estate. It should have given me determination, but all I could think about was the sad irony that I was going to die just a few minutes before salvation. I didn't want to look back, but of course I did, and if I remember anything of what happened that night, it would be what I saw just then. I know there's a handful of people who think the cyclist is just some vicious kid, or a potential Ted Bundy in the making. They think he's a danger, yeah, but that at the end of the day, he's just a human being like us. What I saw convinced me otherwise. There are certain expressions that a human face should be incapable of making, some contours that just don't belong. The cyclist had one of those expressions on his face. The best way I could describe it is like this. When you're watching a nature documentary, and you see something like a lion or crocodile tearing after their quarry, picture that in your head, and you see that, even though they're about to kill their prey, there is no malice or anger to be seen. The jaws are slack, slightly agape, and there's tension gathering around the eyes, but everything else is as still as lake water. That's exactly what the cyclist looked like. It wasn't that he wanted to kill me, he just had to. His full weight was pressed against the handlebars, leaning out so far that any human would have face-planted by that stage. One hand was raised towards me, palm open and fingers straining out from their sockets. The bike's light was lapping around my heels. And me not looking ahead, I glanced off one of the bollards painfully, my thigh turning purple within the minute. The cyclist was going to get me. I was sure of it. Whether it was bravery or cowardice, I turned away from him, and I saw how close I was going to get before I died. Maybe it was the wind buffeting me forward, maybe I was just pessimistic with my outcome, or some reverse inside me suddenly opened its floodgates, but I felt my pace pick up, my shoes worn to shreds by this stage, and my socks turning pink-red as the tarmac pierced my soul. A man in his driveway saw me running. Then he must have saw what was behind me, because he sprinted back inside and slammed the door shut. "You bastard," I yelled at him. And then I was there, on my estate's footpath. Behind me was the rusty shrill shriek of brakes being pressed hard. The cyclist had stopped. I saw him there, head crooked at an angle, and with both his feet still on the pedals on a stopped bike, like he was doing some sort of circus balancing act. And without touching the tarmac, he backpedaled and cycled back the way he came. I managed to get home before crying, slumped against the door with my lungs billowing in and out. I locked the door, pulled myself upstairs to my bedroom, and pulled down the blinds. The adrenaline was still coursing in my veins, and I was still shivering violently under my covers when I heard something downstairs. It was the slow clicking of bicycle wheels you hear at a walking pace. It was accompanied by the bumps and scrapes of something awkwardly trying to fit through the hallway. "Go away," I screamed, and the thing downstairs, the cyclist, answered with an exasperated grunt, like I was being rude for being terrified for my life. I heard my front door, the one I locked, open and close gently. I didn't leave the protective covers of my bed for another few minutes before mustering up the courage to peek through my blinds. Receding into the distance was a figure in a blue coat cycling slowly back towards the Riverwalk. I didn't leave the confines of my room for the better part of the next day. It was only after the sun was bright and high in the sky that I decided to leave. The cyclist had been in my house, and when I got to my kitchen, I found out why. On the table, slightly sticky with sap, but otherwise unharmed, was the laptop bag I had left behind me.